Dick Harpootlian knows politics. As a lifelong Democrat, he's been a leading voice within the party since the Kennedy era. A lawyer by trade, Harpootlian served as Fifth Circuit solicitor in the early 90s and chaired the South Carolina Democratic Party twice. Now he's running for state senate with the hope of bringing transparency and accountability to the state house. We sat down with Harpootlian just days before a special election for a wide-ranging interview that covered everything from campaigning for better regulations of Columbia's 5 Points district to his controversial comments about renting the black vote. Dick, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Thanks for agreeing to sit down with me. Wanted to start off, would you tell those who don't know you a little bit about yourself?
Well, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. I went to Clemson undergraduate school and then came down to South Carolina Law School. When I graduated, I went to work for Jim Anders, who had just been elected solicitor. Worked for him as his deputy solicitor for 8 years. And then I went into private practice with a guy named Jack Swirling. Jack and I had just gone against each other in a case about a guy named Pee Wee Gaskins. Pee Wee Gaskins was the largest mass murderer in the history of the state, and he had taken a contract to hit a guy on death row down at CCI, which is no longer there, but was the prison. Jack defended him, I prosecuted him, we convicted him. He got the death penalty and was later executed. Jack and I practiced together for about 8 years. During that 8 years, I ran for Richland County Council, was elected, served 4 years. And then when my mentor, the guy that hired me, Jim Anders, retired, I ran for solicitor in 1990, was elected, served till 1995, and then went back into private practice. Okay. That's where I've been. I'm married. I have a daughter who's a dancer, lives in New York, and got a dog.
Okay. And you are a lifelong Democrat?
I'm a lifelong Democrat. In 1968, when I was in college, met Gene McCarthy, who was running for president, saw Bobby Kennedy at Martin Luther King's funeral, which I attended in April of 68, and got involved with both of them. That didn't work out. Richard Nixon won that year. But I became involved in virtually every Democratic campaign that I could get involved in after that.
Okay.
Went to New Hampshire with Bill Clinton in 92. Went door to door with Barack Obama. Endorsed him early, and I've remained active in Democratic politics.
Okay. Now, you are the former chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party.
Right. And
you also have a thriving law practice here in Columbia. Why on earth would you now run for the South Carolina Senate?
Well, doubt my sanity. But what you can't doubt is this. What I've observed is that government is broken. We continue to attempt to address the same problems: education, healthcare, roads, environment, and nothing changes. And when John Corson pled guilty to public corruption charges and vacated the seat, I've lived in that district for 41 years. I know the people in that district. And, I have done well in the practice of law. And economically, I can afford to do it. And it's not a career. I want to get up there, do what I can to turn things around, and then get out. So, I'm inspired by ordinary people who get involved in public service, not for a career, but to get the job done, whatever it is they want to address, and then go back to their private lives. So my incentive to get things done is to get out of this Senate seat and back into private life as quickly as I can. Okay. Now, I remember when you ran for chair of the party, you said, I believe you was going to run one term, and that was it, and you kept your word. Yep. What was that like, running the party, being the county chair of the party, state chair of the party? Well, I guess you could say in a humorous way, it's like herding cats. But in all seriousness, you get to meet some extraordinary people who are dedicated to public service. They're not in it for gain. They're not in it for ego. These are folks that want to improve their community, their state, and their country. And at the same time, you run into folks who are in it for gain, who are in it, who are egomaniacs that just want the license plate, or they want the power. And it's an honor as chairman to nurture those who are in it for the right reasons and discourage those who aren't. South Carolina legislature is a really tough place. It's Republican majority.
how do you've been a vocal critic of the South Carolina legislature, once calling them incompetent? How do you think you can make a difference in the legislature?
Well, I think there's a couple ways. The first way is this. What I found is that most legislators don't read the bills they're voting on. If they'd read the Base Load Review Act, which gave SC&G the license to steal money from the ratepayers, it wouldn't have passed. Now, it not only passed, it passed overwhelmingly. So even the folks that voted for it now concede they didn't read it. They were just told by a lobbyist or somebody it was good for SC&G. What's good for SC&G has got to be good for the state. So the first thing is I'm a lawyer. I read the law for a living. So I'm going to read every bill, and I'll have some comment on it as to what it really does. Why are we really doing this? The second thing is the budget has more pork packed in it than Brown's Barbecue down in Williamsburg. It's just you got to look hard to find it, but when you find it, you begin to understand what's wrong with our state.
Recently, said that you're going to campaign on transparency, and
right.
You made statements that you would be calling, or one of the things you'll be working toward is mandatory minimum sentences for those who violate public trust. Tell me a little bit why and what you're trying to accomplish.
So, as a prosecutor for years, the legislature passed mandatory minimums, and I get some 17-year-old kid who sold some drugs because he doesn't have a high school education. He has no other way to make a living, and I guess they say he could sweep floors or whatever, but the easy money was selling drugs. Mandatory minimum sentence, a 17-year-old kid who doesn't know any better, in effect. You take a legislator, a sophisticated senator or House member, who takes money to do something corrupt, they need to go to jail for a minimum amount of time, because that minimum sentence will deter that much more educated, more astute legislator from going down the wrong road. Whereas those minimum sentences have no effect whatsoever on the folks that they're being applied to in most instances.
Okay. You definitely, I would say, have your own style of doing things. A lot of times people will say you could be a bit abrasive or rub people the wrong way, but you've done a lot of work with the community. Recently, people always bring up the fact that you said one time, I think it was 86, a reporter quoted you with saying, I don't want to buy the black vote, I just want to rent the black vote. So a lot of times people might say, well, Harpootlians are racist. How do you respond to those?
Well, two things. One, the way that occurred was I was running, this was in June of 1986. Luther Batiste, an African-American city councilman who actually was non-city council at that point, he was a lawyer, walking in the courthouse, and he jokingly said to me, because the Republicans are always saying the Democrats buy the black vote, hey, did you buy the black vote today? And I said, no, I just rented it for the day. We laughed. I didn't know there was a reporter standing behind us. It was maybe a bad attempt at humor. But for those who looked at my record, as I mentioned a moment ago, I marched from Ebenezer to Morehouse behind the coffin of Martin Luther King. That's in 1968. I have fought for civil rights my entire life by supporting Barack Obama for president early. I was the only statewide official that declared for him in April of 2007. Racism is an anathema to me. There are many politicians in South Carolina who are racist, who tell jokes behind closed doors. Not in the sense of humor, but in the sense of malice. And I won't tolerate that. I'm not going to tolerate in the South Carolina Senate. I don't tolerate in my office. I don't tolerate it in my private life at all. So no, I can be a little irreverent. I've said some things nationally that folks have think cross the line, but all of it's in a sense of humor.
Another thing that you campaigned on, or that you picked up the mantle on, was you say you want to clean up 5 Points.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I've lived in the 5 Points area for 40 years. And when Carolina had 15,000 students and there were 2 bars down there, kids want to get down to 5 Points and have a good time. We don't have a problem. But now they've got 35,000 students or 40,000 students. There are 19 bars. And on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, there are thousands of kids, literally 1,000 or 2,000 kids, milling around in the street drunk. And so they when they leave, they spread out through our neighborhoods. They're vomiting in people's front yards, whether it be Martin Luther King neighborhood or whether it be Wells Gardens where I live. And the neighborhoods just had enough. Vandalism, drunken behavior. And again, most of these kids are under 21. They shouldn't be getting alcohol at all by law. And so, I've talked to, tried to enlist the help of the city and the Department of Revenue and didn't get very far. So I filed lawsuits, opposed the relicensing of some of these places, and we're winning. And as a result, I think when the kids get back this fall, they're going to find less opportunity. I think they're going to find an enhanced enforcement by SWED and the City of Columbia. And that's about quality of life. It's quality of life in our neighborhoods, again, whether it's Wales Gardens where I live, or Martin Luther King Park, or Waverly. And we've had folks come testify at hearings from those neighborhoods about how it negatively impacts their life. Again, I don't mind having kids having a good time, but what they're doing is illegal. And again, I'm a former solicitor, and I can read the law, and the judge agreed with me and shut down one of the bars. We've got another bar that's looking to get shut down, and I've sued 3 other bars.
Definitely are a man in town that can get stuff done. What would be your top 3 priorities if you were elected state senator?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is bring about transparency. Every other state agency, city and county agency, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. That is, if you want to know what's going on in any city department or county department or state department, you can file a request, freedom of information. I want all the information about this project, all the information about the city finance department, the county, whatever. Exempted from that law is the state legislature. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think if the public is able to look at what's going on over there, that will deter some of the conduct, number one. And number two, give citizens more information. I mean, in the age of the internet, with websites, you can find out just about anything except about state government. So the legislature specifically, I helped found and contribute to an entity called PAPR, P-A-P-R, Public Access to Public Records, recognizing that the local media just can't do the job anymore. They don't have the resources. And they serve, that entity, its first project was serve Freedom of Information Act requests on Dan Johnson, the solicitor, which resulted in revelations about excessive spending and trips to the Galapagos and Poland and Dubai on our dime. So he got beat 3-1 by Byron Gibson in the primary. And it's heartening to see that once the public's given the information, they act on it. And that's what we need to do for the legislature. So number one would be opening transparency in everything they do. Number two, the sessions are too long. Folks come down here and they spend 6 months doing nothing. This year they met until the end of May, couldn't pass a budget. That's the one thing they got to do, and nothing about SC&G. They had to come back to do that. So what I would say is that we need to do things to incentivize folks to come to Columbia, get things done, and go home. One of the things I found astounding is legislators get almost $200 a day per diem. I'd be entitled to get it even though the State House is 1.5 miles from my house. We need to do 2 things about that. One, you shouldn't collect per diem if you don't have to spend the night. And you shouldn't have to spend the night unless you live a certain distance from the State House. If we subjected legislators to the same per diem rules that a Department of Transportation or a DSS worker has, we'd be fine, because it would be an economic disincentive to spend the night or a disincentive to stay here for 6 months. There's some special interest in sponsoring a dinner, a breakfast, and a lunch every day. So you come to Columbia, or you're here. If you live, in Lexington County, you drive over. Somebody's buying your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, and you get $200 and you go home. Really? Now, it's not a heck of a lot of money, but we should live by the same requirements every other state employee lives by. Our health care program ought to be the same as every other state employee. Our pension, I mean, some of the legislators draw pensions after 8 years, and they get $30,000 a year for life. That's wrong. I mean, it's called public service. It's not public make a buck. Okay? You don't get elected to the legislature as a money-making enterprise. So we need to adjust that. And sort of the third thing is that we need to understand how the state budget works. I've talked to 4 senators, none of whom can tell me in general terms what's in that budget. They got their own little thing they're concerned about, and they don't care about anything else. If we did, I've been told by one budget writer, there's probably 10% of that budget is pork, pure, take-it-home pork, sending it back to the district pork, Republicans and Democrats. Well, that's $800 million. Think what we could do with teacher salaries. Georgia pays their teachers 18% more than our teachers. No wonder, I read in the paper this morning that Richland One's having to hire foreign teachers from foreign countries to teach our kids. Really? So we need to make sure our kids get the best education that we can provide them. And we shouldn't be spending money on pork. We ought to be spending it on them.
Okay. Dick, before I let you go, I had a question for you. You're a prominent white attorney in South Carolina in the capital city of Columbia. If you were a Republican, you'd be sky's the limit. Why are you a Democrat?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is my life experience is that all of us are no better off than the worst of us. I mean, maybe in Russia when the Tsar was in, or in England when the king was really the king, you could have a regal class that could let people starve in the streets and suffer, and you could ignore that. We're a democracy, and we owe it to our fellow citizens to ensure that they have the minimum to have an opportunity to advance themselves. If you don't have adequate health care, or your kids don't have adequate health care, those kids can't get a good education. They need to have access to a good public education. The Republicans seem to think they work on a trickle-down economics theory. That is, if the rich get richer, they're going to spend that money, and it's somehow going to help the folks down here. Trump is the latest advocate of that. It hadn't worked. It never has worked. That's the let them eat cake philosophy of Louis XVI in France, and he got what he deserved. So, my life experience is, and again, I find it somewhat disingenuous for Republicans to call themselves Christian conservatives. Jesus Christ said, render unto Caesar. Jesus Christ said it'd be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel through the eye of a needle. I mean, if they lived the life and preachings of Jesus Christ, they wouldn't be amassing billions of dollars. They wouldn't be burning coal to poison the rest of the planet. Jesus was an environmentalist. He was an advocate for the poor and the children. So, if my conservative friends are really Christian, then they care about the kids, and they care about the old people, and they care about the sick. That's what Jesus would have done.
Well, Dick, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, find out how they can donate or get involved with the campaign, how would they go about doing it?
Well, we have a website, Harpootlian 4, Senate, scsenate.com.
All right. Dick, before I get out of here, any last words you want to leave with the voters?
Yeah, I think I want them to understand this. I'm not running for the Senate as a career. I've already got a career, and I'm too old to start a new one. I'm running to go up there and see if we can't shake things up. I think that that the focus should be on the next generation, not the next election. I think we need to focus on what will improve the lives of that next generation, not how do I get reelected. And my sense is that most of the folks up there are focused on getting reelected rather than doing the right thing. and rather than focusing on the issues. Now, they may do a little bit here and there, but their sole purpose in being there should be making sure that the next generation has more than this generation has in terms of opportunity. They ought to have a great education. They ought to have health care. They ought to have all the opportunity. And if you did that, then you minimize poverty, you minimize violence. I mean, you don't see, the kind of violence we're seeing in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. You don't see that in the middle-class white neighborhoods or middle-class black neighborhoods. I mean, poverty drives much of this violence because folks don't have anything. They got, as Bob Dylan says, when you got nothing to lose. And I don't know, my Republican friends want to put the National Guard in or, shoot a bunch of people. I just think that it's going to take a block by block pacification by getting people the appropriate resources they need to have a decent life. And that's why I'm a Democrat, and that's what I believe, and that's what I'm going to advocate in the South Carolina Senate.